And so I guess like first, before you know sort of where we're gonna go, but like my first question is why are you here? Like why did you say yes to this conversation?
I think I'm still trying for myself to articulate like a spirituality for the first time in my life, really. And anybody who, I seem like is encountering me and seems like they want to kind of talk about that. I feel like I want to talk about it just to tease it out for myself and hit it off against other people, because I know that no ideas really stand unless they've been encountered with others and other perspectives and stuff. Yeah, anybody who wants to talk to me about like this stuff, which is really new for me in a lot of ways, I'm happy to talk to them about it.
Sweet. Dude. Yeah, me too. So I guess I'm thinking a lot about what to get out of the conversation and how to tee it up in a way that might help like accelerate stripping away some of the layers, especially since we don't know each other. It's a weird thing for I think us to talk about. We're both millennials or whatever, grew up Western weird in caps acronym people. So we've got all this shit we have to strip away from like personalities and whatever.
Right.
But and so I followed the whole Chapo project since like episode one, a long time Grey Wolf, watched the whole arc of it, started following your streams, but a lot of your worldview is it's like the Christman, but like you pick it up in fragments and tomes here and there, but you don't get to fully unwrap like the Necronomicon and get like a synthesis to start frying your brain. So hopefully we'll do a little bit about that here. But I thought it would be helpful. Like you guys just did the 500th anniversary episode, so props. Let's rewind it like
Thank you.
13.7 billion years
Huh.
and talk about. So at that time, apparently some shit happened, and then we get time and space. Uh, is that right? Like, how do you conceive of that?
Uh, I mean, yeah, that sounds about right. The thing blew up, and the universe filled with shit. And well, the universe like and shit like defined each other. Uh, Energy, matter banging off of each other, and then at some point we get uh, these creatures that are capable of perception. And that perception over time, as I guess as a survival mechanism, it is intensified so that survival can be prolonged. And eventually, you get to a point of perceptual acuity, where instead of just being able to perceive that which is directly around, beings get a point where they can create in their own heads a understanding that goes backwards, like a memory, and also once it grows intense enough, is able to project forward to an imagined condition that might occur. And in so doing, we start banging off each other in a way that creates uh, a coordinated reordering of matter, reordering of the world through our attempts to come to terms and understand one another for what is at first, I think, understood to be self-interest in a narrow sense, but eventually becomes a sort of a species-wide project. And I think that's the course of human consciousness that we've been on, has been a absolutely grueling and horrifying attempt to come into recognition of each other as part of one being, essentially. Because I do believe that with Spinoza that there is only one material in the universe. There's only one substance in the universe, which means that there is no separation of beings in any real sense, that it is a illusion created by our limited perceptive apparatus, but that one that can be and is on a moment to moment basis emotionally transcended, and I think for I think hopefully will eventually be transcended universally.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm sort of letting that sit here while I take a big sip of my beverage. sort of like the primordial stew. Um,
Yeah.
so I guess to riff on that for a second, the man, the human animal, like whatever. There's also this idea out there somewhere in the discourse that the idea of the self is a later development. You know what I mean? As
Hmm.
opposed to like some sort of tribal kin group hunting the mammoth, whatever the fuck consciousness. So like where like those first cave paintings, right, that have been around for like forever, is that like an individual internal thing, the beginning of interiority, or is that a social mechanism, or like does that question even make sense?
I think by definition it sort of has to start, interiority has to start at the individual level, but very I think that it as soon as you get a situation where you have like a within a like a group of humans, you have a some sort of like symbolic vocabulary that you immediately that interiority immediately becomes a kind of a collaborative process, and it always is. I mean, even in our hyper individualized world where we think it isn't, it is. It is just that we that the sickness of our social order is, I think, largely generated by the illusion that it isn't. But I do think it begins with a being trying to live, a being trying to survive out of its basest self preservation. But because we are brought up within a social framework, that as soon as we are able to imagine outside of time, we are doing it together, because we can only do that with symbols, and symbols have to have some sort of intelligibility outside the self to have meaning. Like Wittgenstein said, you can't have a private language.
Yeah. Let's zoom forward to like agriculture or something, as we're sort of charting the basis from the like stirrings of consciousness into your stripe of historical materialism, or
Mm-hmm.
like the self, the beginning of the modern self. Like, how does it begin as you think of it to change and stew and stir around this whole thing?
I mean, what I think it boils. I thought about this some, and obviously I'm pulling this all out of my ass because I don't have
Yeah, dude.
I don't have any kind of grounding in anthropology or archaeology or anything.
No, dude, me
Uh,
neither. This is fucking group therapy. Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Good. So just as long as that is stipulated.
Yeah, 100%.
Uh,
Yeah.
so we have a situation where early humanity we are understood to be like a social organism within, of course, a tribal bound, because our symbolic order is limited to those who find it legible, which is geographically defined, right? Because of the limitations of technology, the non-existence or the very low level of technology, allowing for transmission of symbols. So that means tribal order, warfare with the stranger. But once you, I think, and that I think that situation, I think the fact that we have tribal hunter-gatherer societies that exist to the present day unchanged since prehistory indicates that in a environment that is stable, that is much like with any other animal species, a stable symbiote or a stable a homeostatic relationship.
Yeah.
It's not going to necessarily change. There's no need for it to. There is no dissatisfaction. No one's going to decide to build a light bulb because it wouldn't occur. But when you have a condition of environmental stress, when you have a condition of some sort of enforced scarcity, that requires, I think, a the hoarding and the hoarding of surplus, I guess is how I would put it. The abstracting away from the labor of the daily sustenance to a reserve for survival. And as soon as you start stacking up surplus, you are going to require a division of labor to do that. And that is where you get hierarchies. And that is where you get some people laboring for others. And that is where the symbolic order of the social being, the social organism, changes to justify that hierarchy and to perpetuate that hierarchy. And that is then where the beginning tinder of the class conflict that generates the civilizational transition over time and space begins.
And would you go so far as to say like that then generates how the symbolic whatevers come up to sort of make sense and paper over that and justify it, blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, because there are some people who are going to get to sit on their ass while other people work. And they're sitting on the ass is justified by their essentially administrative capacity, their ability to do marshal work and direct work. But over time, that situation creates a social schism between the two groups. And since the symbol making power is on the side of the idle, whose very idleness increases their ability to intensify symbolic systems of meaning, that over time, that what originally might have been a necessary emergency exigency to maintain, the social body becomes a self-perpetuating and sustaining hierarchy where the idleness becomes the point rather than the good of the community in some abstract sense.
Yeah. Okay. So time out there, and then let's flip it back to the 13.7 billion, right? So are you a determinist? Like, was this all baked in and we're all just still like the leftover stardust,
I think that like with, momentum and position and like that basic, the Heisenbergian paradox, right? Of position and momentum, that I think is mirrored in that.
See, I don't know that one. My ability to bullshit my way through this and try
it's often used to just say like you change things by observing it,
Okay.
And it boils down to the idea that it is impossible to know simultaneously the position of a subatomic particle and its speed or momentum.
Okay.
You can know one, but by knowing the one, you will alter the other and not be able to like objectively determine it. And that is a contradiction. And I think that that those contradictions resolving themselves is like the actual engine of the universe. That's what moves the matter through energy. It moves all of the processes through each other. It moves all of our social processes through each other at like nested complexities. And in the same way, I think that we do live in a fully determined universe, I think. But our human lives, because of our ignorance of the mechanisms that are shaping our decisions and shaping our actions and shaping the outcomes of those things, is fully free at the same time. And those free choices we make, I kind of think of it as a multiverse concept. I sort of imagine that the universe contains all possibilities, right? But that when choices are made, they set onto paths that then once again have almost infinite outcomes that are then chosen, essentially like a map within like a greater nested structure of possibilities. And that our conscious choices are essentially what is driving us through the strata of like the universe.
Okay, yeah. So like the strands of fate, and it's all the weaving and the looming. And if you cut one
Yeah.
thread, and like the
Yeah,
classic
but
sort
that
of
I think that still means at a physical level that it's fully determined, but only in retrospect. It cannot be known at the time.
because when you
And
observe it,
and
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so like I guess where I go back to is the moment of before a time-based concept, outside a space-based concept, but we've got this thing where the smart quantum whoever's will come back and say, okay, there was a moment and that's where everything came to be. So
Hmm.
that has always struck me in a totally self-serving way, since it confirms the like theist biases that I just sort of inherited and grew up with. Okay, so great, there you go. Creation of the universe ex nihilo or whatever. Like you can at least see how the argument would work from there to some sort of God, right? Like, have you ever considered it, thought about that?
I mean, for me, the notion of an actual existent like power, a consciousness outside of the universe, has never been satisfactory because it always just seemed circular. It doesn't explain anything that isn't already evident within. It doesn't explain anything more than than you would be than would be explained by a totally physically bound universe. And so and for a long time that was sort of where I ended it. It's like, yeah, it doesn't make sense. So I just thought, well, spirituality isn't a real thing. It's sort of like a faculty of mind that I don't have. And I've come recently to realize that that's not the case, and that, well, I do think that spirituality and like a sense of a transcendence is a faculty of mind. It is not fully inherited or bound by biology. It can be developed and it can be intensified. But uh, I think that any constructions that we have uh, to describe that feeling are degraded symbols, are more most importantly historically fixed symbolic structures that I think by definition can't really refer to anything outside of the universe, because they're all being made by us trying to explain a feeling that cannot be explained. And that is why religion and spirituality is such a breathtaking array of ideas and concepts and beliefs, is because it is, billions of voices trying to pronounce a word that is not to be found in any human language.
Yeah, it's just crying out in pain, trying to understand. Can't even say something. As soon as you say it, right? It's like even that
Yeah,
just sort of breaks down.
right. Yeah, because you're already you have all it there. It's like lost. It's signal loss over the space of translation. So it's a feeling. Translating a feeling into words is already, to yourself, is already degrading it. The words that you're even thinking to yourself to describe the feeling you have do not actually contain the fullness of the feeling. And then finding words that you can then translate to others is another level of degradation of translation. And so we're all operating at these very low levels of signal relative to the actual sensation, the real sensation. And that's what I now realize, is that this is a real thing that is as real as the universe, but that the words we use to describe it cannot uh, in any way contain it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think that there's, it remind like there's some. I think there's some Bible. Like I'm not like able to quote. I'm not like the most Bible, person, but like there's this phrase I think I picked up somewhere about like, like some spiritual master, let's say, like telling the disciples, whatever, you're on the seashore somewhere, you're in some perfect story setting and saying like you're not going to have the words to pray, but it's just describing it as like an internal like groan of the spirit, you know?
Mhm.
And I think there's some echo there to what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
But so all right, so
Yeah.
let's yeah, no, go ahead, go
No,
ahead.
no, 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 no. Go.
So I was just saying, all right, so let's pull it back for a second and let's zoom it back up to, were you born in the 80s? Like we're both millennials, right? But I know
Yeah.
you said like
Mhm.
you feel your impending midlife crisis, so I was
Oh,
guessing
it's not
80s
impending.
over.
It's here. But yeah, no, I'm like, yeah, yeah.
So like what was your background? And we don't have to take it super personal, but we totally can. I'm open to take it wherever you want it. So we're fast forwarding from 13.7 billion to the rise of agriculture to all of a sudden we get little baby Matt. Like where did you pop out? Like how would you describe your context as you understand it now, looking back and then capturing it so it exists at that moment in space?
I was born at the beginning of the neoliberal era, which is pretty funny. I was kind of brought in like as a little baby harbinger of doom. The town I'm from, Manitowoc, it's about 30,000 people. It's about an hour or so north of Milwaukee on the Lake Michigan, and it is essentially a miniature Rust Belt town. It was historically a shipbuilding town because the Manitowoc River flows to the Mississippi and therefore can get ships down into the Gulf and out through the Great Lakes to the North Sea. So it's strategically it's well positioned to do shipbuilding. There was a yacht company that was operating when I was a kid. There was a pot and pan manufacturer. There's actually a brand of crane called Manitowoc that was built there, and I think uh, hotel ice machines too. And
That's beautiful. I love
as
random
I
shit like
was
that.
growing up, they were all closing. Like the Miro Pot and Pan factory closed when I was, I think, in like junior high or so. And so I was there, sort of watching the ship the thing kind of button up. And then, like many people of my sort of scholastic aptitude from that position, I went to college and never went back because growing up in that milieu, I felt more than anything just alienated from everybody. That was sort of the signal emotional register of my time as a child.
Did you
Was
go
like I
to
was the only mind in the universe, and as a result, I very quickly realized that I wanted to go somewhere else to find some other connection, maybe somewhere else.
yeah, did you go to public school?
I did, yes, all the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah, we went to public school. It was like traumatic, you know.
Yeah.
But it was. Fuck that.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
It's terrible. It's like some real Lord of the Flies shit because you can still remember like very specific incidents are right there in the working
Yeah.
memory.
No, if I get like a good like Proustian moment, I will just be back there. Yeah, it doesn't feel good.
So, wait, how far away did you flee to go to college?
Not that far. I had always dreamed of going way far away, like to a different city, a big city, a different state. But in my senior year of high school, I had this absolutely sky blue freak spinal infection that waylaid me for my entire senior year, basically. And at the end of it, I just was so fixated on recovery that I didn't really have the energy to put into like a real exhaustive college search. But my mother was very concerned that I get out and go to school and not fail to launch, as a result of the trauma of my back injury. So I ended up going to a small liberal arts school in Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is uh, in a it's in the White Flight suburbs west of Milwaukee.
Hmm.
So I didn't end up going nearly as far away as I thought I was going to, but but who knows what would have happened in the absence of the injury.
Maybe there's a plan.
I mean, I assume everything. I mean, I do honestly believe that everything does happen for a reason, like literally in the literal sense of that term. And as a result, since that's true, since it can't be changed, then a subjective, emotional, human reason should be found with for it. You know, like that's what that means to me. It doesn't mean and that it's some sort of uh, uh, coping mechanism. I mean, it is a coping mechanism, but not in the sense of sort of trying denying like the reality of trauma or pain in life and the unfairness and randomness of things, but to accept the challenge of living anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like everything else on Twitter, it's like I hate it, but I use it, and I also know why it's there and love it at the same time. But like, cope and cringe are the only things worth having, I guess.
That's the thing. One thing I've really come to realize is that the internet culture, the thing that makes it so poisonous is that it is an attempt to escape your mortality, your humanity, your human body, and the like necessary grounding to the world and to other people in the world. And one of the ways that it does that is by essentially criminalizing all of the most necessary elements of life, like the things that constitute our best selves, which is risking being cringy, and having the wisdom and confidence to cope when you must. The internet tells you no, you can escape from those requirements, and you can for a little bit, but you will always find yourself back in your body. And the more time you spent online, the less equipped you will be to cope and to cringe when you actually have to.
We can make it so that you never have to cope or cringe as long as you never leave our sweet digital embrace. Yeah. Never log off.
Yeah, exactly.
And you'll never have to do it. Yeah.
Which is why the thing, and like when I was like a very brittle materialist, and I was dealing with the irreconcilable sort of insanity provoking contradiction of imagining myself to be the sole node of consciousness in the universe, and also having enough awareness of like the reality of science to know that my body was finite and that I was going to die someday. The only way that I could even continue like living without being driven mad by that thought was by imagining, well, someday they'll figure out a way to put me in the computer. And then I won't have to worry about it. Like that was my version of, a simplistic salvation narrative, because I convinced myself of like the truth of any revealed religion. So that became the revealed religion that I chose to believe in, because it allowed me it allowed the possibility of final and permanent escape from the requirements of living.
Yeah. Damn, dude, that's some heavy shit. I guess like when I think about the whole materialist, like you've got the real universe, Hard Knocks, and then you got all your loosey-goosey supernatural mumbo jumbo, is that like if the quantum weirdos are right, then it really doesn't, there's no sense in even trying to talk about that distinction. If everything that can be conceived also has mass and moves, then all of it's true. And so it's actually more helpful to think, like if you look at some of the Epstein shit, it probably is more helpful to believe in the Constantine, graphic novel version of the universe, right? Like there's all these fucking forces permeating everything. And the John dies at the end, Lovecrafty. If you look at something sideways, you're going to get freaked out. If you stare at the suburban lawn hard enough, you'll see it flicker. At least I can defend it in a way that lets me continue coping in my way.
Yeah.
Like in material terms, you know what I mean?
100%. That's another thing that I've come to realize, because one of the things that made me flee into this fantasy that I could just be, a pure mind, was the shabbiness of the world as it was presented to me and as I perceived it. the dry mechanistic nature of it. And yeah, what I've come to realize is that even if that is true, even if there is a material world that somehow is like determinative, which I maybe, I can make the assumption that it is on a day-to-day basis in order to, move throughout space successfully. But I'm now fully aware that of how deeply the mind conspires to produce this world, which means our ability, yes, to pierce the veil is much greater than I gave myself or anybody else credit for when I was just sort of a relatively unthinking atheist.
One thing that I never understood, and maybe I just wasn't on Twitter enough right before, like in the 3 years before you guys started the pod, like how did you go from alienated dude to liberal arts college to Chapo?
I spent my post-collegiate years basically paralyzed because I could not imagine like a rewarding and meaningful work in a world that every way I looked at it seemed to appear meaningless and soul destroying. And so I, like many people, fled to online to try to live there instead and find meaning there, and to replace the emotional richness of lived experience where real knowledge is accrued, although I didn't really know that because I hadn't had enough of them, and instead tried to subsist on the weak tea simulated version of that, the pseudo experiences and the pseudo emotions of the internet. And that meant finding things to care about and to invest my engagement with them with a meaning that was purely synthetic it was basically magical, but sort of a black magic, a dark magic. And I guess I focused enough. I focused on it enough. Focused my alienation and my fear and my confusion and my dim but felt sense of outrage and hope for something better onto this social media canvas where I could express myself and eventually come in contact with other people who were similarly trying to escape their realities and to forge a new one. And I happened through chance to encounter some people who were on precisely the right wavelength with me, that we could, in the moment of the first Bernie campaign in 2015 and 16, come together and essentially create a alternative perspective on sort of the pageantry of politics that was increasingly engaging people who found the presentation of politics in conventional media to be fraudulent.
Yeah. And you also got really good at posting. I mean, let's not sell yourself short, right? Like that's where you learned.
Well, yeah, I mean that was
that
it.
medium, yeah.
I said I was posting to have a creative outlet, because we all do have a desire to imprint on ourselves on the world, to feel like we have some control over something, to be recognized. That's the drive that we have. I think that's the drive to be loved, is to be recognized. And that is what, for a lot of people who are isolated and couldn't imagine finding love in other places, it was an outlet for that. And that's, I think, the engine for the most serious posters.
Yeah, I always thought Twitter was like a particularly sort of sick medium for that, because you begin, like when you create your account, it's like being put in the equivalent of like a padded cell, because you just start typing shit out.
Yeah, that's precisely it. Like, we think that we're engaging with the world, but we're really engaging with this curated cul-de-sac, and then you eventually start bouncing off the walls, which is why political over time, and this is what I noticed, and it really helped me sort of come to terms and be forced to come to terms with the pathological nature of my engagement with it, is that because of those constraints that exist, which you're not even aware of, you begin to start drawing on the walls and creating like a whole artificial realm to give further meaning. Like you're stuck in a room and then you start drawing like fake windows on the walls to imagine people outside of there, instead of taking your head out of the goddamn room in the first place, which you could do at any time.
And that really, so that's like the whole, if we want to synthesize vote ball, right? And you cut off the streams and say, all right, guys, I've done it. I've exercised it, but I need to stop. I'm going to write now and log off and grill even harder and figure this shit out. I mean, that's the synthesis, right? Is that like,
yeah.
So you guys are reflecting back on the whole journey of the two Bernie campaigns and this movement that you guys, I mean, really created, at least in the phenomenon that like everyone who didn't get on board seemed to complain about, right? Like the Bernie Bros, as far as I can tell, that was just like your
Yes.
podcast, right? Every journalist.
I mean, I would have said others were responsible too, but then we ended up in 2020, right before the, I guess it was a Super Tuesday, on the front page of the New York Times as literally the avatars of incivility. So I guess, according to the paper of record, yes, it was us. And who am I to disagree with them?
Quick aside, you guys have never had a good think piece written. You guys have never had a good profile.
No.
You've never gotten your due from the mainstream media, as far as I can tell. It's just...
Yeah, we got the New Yorker article right after the election in 2016, which was a big. It helped us. It got people who to sign up who'd never heard of us, but it was. I mean, in the first paragraph, she basically called me fat, which did not appreciate.
Yeah, come on, what's with the body shaming?
Yeah, like a very. It was a very kind of cheap, bit of what about all of the, what about the people you're being mean to? And the fact that it was Gia Tolentino who wrote that is now in retrospect very, very funny, finding out that she has come from a family of alleged human traffickers.
Was that same?
But yeah, no great,
dude, I did not know that,
because our job is to be like a boogeyman for them, is to validate the establishment political agenda.
Dang, dude, I never made that connection. I knew who this lady was because of the whole Epstein like brain. I didn't realize that this same chick who had the meltdown over this was the one who profiled you guys. That really is fucking. See, there is a plan. God's got it. God's in control.
Clearly, got to be the case.
So you are looking back on the project over the last few years and evolving, growing, and looking back on some of the engagement as adolescent. And how do you characterize the shift in your thinking from a virtual politics to what you need to do going forward?
More than it doesn't. I mean, I honestly don't think that anything that I did with the show or that we've done with the show was in some sort of sense bad or wrong or even counterproductive. I feel like it was all necessary, happened for a reason. We were all like coming to terms with like the reality of living in this moment where coming to terms with the reality of political institutions being fully disengaged from any kind of democratic accountability, and figuring out what that meant. And there was nothing unreasonable about our expectation that the place where people come to spend their time every day, the internet, was the place to do political, awareness and activism. And I think we had good effect. I think we got people involved in a positive way that they otherwise wouldn't have. But I think that we are now at a point where we can look around us and see the limitations of that. And that makes us have to ask, well, what are we going to do now that we know what we know? Because to continue in the old way after having seen this would be false, and would be it would be a fraud on the audience, and also it would be bad spiritually for ourselves, because it would require us to perpetuate falsehoods, and that's not good for you. For me, it mainly has been coming to terms with the reality that I have a desire to be a political active person, because I do think that that we are in a crisis moment that requires a response from people who want to see something better, but that I cannot expect my role as a broadcaster to be that political action. We started the show insisting that the show wasn't politics, and I think that we understood that to be the case. I know that I, for example, joined. I've helped. I don't know if I helped found it, but I was at the early meetings of a when I lived in Cincinnati before moving to New York, of the founding of a DSA chapter there, to try to do political activism on the ground. But then the show became this huge lightning rod on the left that made it feel like any attempt to pick a side on any question was counterproductive. But we remain, I think, whether we admitted to it to ourselves or said it publicly or not, we were all basically waiting for the Mahdi to return, for Bernie to run again in 2020. And then when he did, we, for a brief moment, felt like we were squaring the circle. We were doing politics while also having fun at our lucrative media jobs. And the failure of the Bernie campaign is what made us all have to reassess. And I realized I still like the show. I still think the show is good. I think the show is worth doing. I enjoy doing it. My co-hosts enjoy doing it. But we're back to that original understanding that this isn't politics and there is no thing to wait for anymore. So discovering a political active self so that drive within me can be satisfied productively is going to have to be my task, independent of whatever I do for a living. I do not know what that is. I think going through the talking out the vote ball stuff and doing the vlogs and now trying to put things down into a coherent written form is all part of that process for me, and hopefully for some of the people who've listened and will be reading. What the end result of that process is, I don't know.
You've been talking a lot about love and solidarity and a discovery of the spiritual. So where did that start in this whole process?
I think it was when I started to interrogate sort of the insufficiency of my commitment to my ideals, and why it seemed like I and everybody I was looking at online were fixated on these pseudo controversies and these pseudo arguments that did not exist to be resolved, but existed to be had, with an underlying assumption being that if we keep having these arguments, then we don't have to do anything else. These arguments will stand in for doing anything meaningful. And I just wondered, well, why are we doing this? And I came to the conclusion for myself anyway, and I think others agree to the extent that I don't think that this is a totally individualized experience, is that our motivation, however we might frame it to ourselves and define it in words, is emotionally self-interested in a narrow egotistical way. We are trying to make the world better for ourselves, and if we can't make the world better for ourselves, we will make our time on earth more narrowly pleasurable for ourselves by engaging in a political spectacle that gives us ego gratification. And that the only effective political action is one motivated not by the desire to please the self, but by a genuine motivation of love for others, which breaks you out of the prison of trying to reason your way to the right action, which you can't do. If you're trying to, if you're what you're actually trying to do is justify your continued inaction and justify your continued comfort, then you will never reason your way to an effective course of action, because that's not what you're actually doing. But if you are motivated by a love that propels you beyond a narrow understanding of things like enjoyment and happiness and pleasure, where the connection to other people, where the amelioration of the suffering of others has a genuine spiritual satisfaction, then you will act regardless of what some political calculus tells you should be doing. And the challenge of that, for me as someone trying to articulate this to people, is that whatever that looks like is by definition defined in the life of a person and cannot be generalized through prescriptive statements. It can only be attuned to emotionally in one's lived life, which is why all I can really ever come back to as a prescription is spend time as much as you can in your body with other people, trying to find that voice and not trying to reason yourself through it in a sterile online process where that's not actually the goal.
Yeah, like I want to go back to the origin of that a little bit, because it's a surprise to me, like in the context of the super irony bro movement that you became a figurehead of, that like that word is now such a powerful part of your lexicon. Like, what is love? I don't say baby don't hurt me, right? But like
like I think that it is recognition. It's recognition of it's recognition and understanding that others are, in a very fundamental way, in a felt, not reasoned way, you, and that there is no pleasure that you can take at the expense of another that does not end up harming you as well, because there is no genuine separation. And so operating out of love means not even having to fight really the urge to selfishly hoard enjoyment, because you can't actually enjoy it because you know whose expense it's at, and that you feel the need to remedy it because you cannot delude yourself into imagining that there is some enduring separation that can allow you to hoard anything.
Yeah, I really resonated with the way you put it about not being able to imagine an interior or interiority for anyone but you versus beginning that process.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people, including people who are dedicated leftists, whatever that means, who operate from a maximal and reflexive suspicion of others, a assumption of like others' insufficiency in some significant way, either intellectually or ideologically, that allows for the continuation of trying to use politics for essentially ego gratification. And that was me too, and it still is to an extent. I mean, my ego's not gone by any means, but I feel like now the difference between how I was and how I feel like I am now is that I'm aware that there is a tension there that has to be struggled with, rather than just a assumed reality that to be operated from.
I've had this idea I've been playing with for a little bit of imaginable futures, which is like you either have what I think of as like the Bezos vision, right? And it looks like he's investing in like space travel and shit. Like that's the plan, 80 years from now.
Yeah, they don't want to go to space.
Yeah. So they're like, at least to nod to the fact that some people see an optimistic version of that, and whether that's like fully automated luxury space communism or whatever, or like a more techno utopian hippie future where like Earth becomes Trader Joe's, but we can replace all of our third world slaves with robot slaves in space, and then everyone can have a Trader Joe's, like whatever. Like I don't buy that myself, but it is like out there for some people. But then there's the far more realistic, I would say, like we keep global warming to like 3 degrees Celsius maybe, and we've got like this cyberpunk dystopian sort of thing. We've got cyberpunk future, or we've got just the collapse in the Walking Dead future, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's probably going to be some of all of that. I mean, I think you probably will have the equivalent of some sort of luxury space communism in very confined enclaves of extreme wealth, while other parts of the globe are basically the Walking Dead, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, right. We're almost there now, like already, right? This Fortress America.
Yeah.
But like the people who seem to vibe with where you're going most on a spiritual level, and like what you've been talking about with your relationship to technology, are green people, right? Like, so there's this idea of, all right, let's log off, let's start a farm or a garden and move towards zero waste, back to the land, permaculture, small scale, blah, blah, blah. And I just wanted to see how you conceive of that, or what you make of those sorts of folks.
I think that that's a totally reasonable desire, and I have to say that my mind drifts in that direction too. I mean, I'm wildly unskilled in any kind of
me too.
productive elements that you would need to. I guess I could be an anime appraiser, but no, I think that's reasonable, and I think that I think that people have to understand that that those sort of movements should not be understood to be a replacement, though, for political action. That they should be part and parcel of a attempt to build, durable social bonds, because those are the only things that are going to be able to resist, total atomization and subordination to technological, like neo-feudalism, is if we are in some real respect cooperate and cooperate in a way that allows us to be sufficient without requiring the capitalist supply chains to maintain our ability to live for ourselves.
Yeah, and you do have to put up with a little bit of cringe and vulnerability and risk to get there, because we're dealing with late capitalist personalities, right? So to even just like start to focus on wading through the cliches, right? And like talking to your neighbors, getting to know the people on your street. Like there is a point at which I sort of feel like 95% of what occupies you on a given day should relate to something that's within like walking distance or a bike ride from you. Like that's the most organic sort of shit we have to deal with. Like that's the most grounded. You just want to live in a body, right? I mean, like that's what we have to put up with, right?
Yeah, and it is, and there's, I think it's tough to accept that, because one, I mean, we're literally in the middle of a pandemic that harder for people to actually be in the same place with each other, which does feel like capitalism sort of expressing in the real world its own logic, like literally its own pathologies being manifested in our social relationships. But it's still the only thing we can do, the only real thing we can do, because we have to accept that there is no thinking our way out of this stuff. There is no magic bullet. There is no ideological recipe or shortcut to meet authentic life and meaningful resistance. It can only come through collaboration that does not have the filters of bad faith and selfishness and delusion that online quote unquote organization has.
But I guess like part of the dilemma is that to access the real magic, you have to sort of be able to surrender yourself to spirituality or religion, right? And whatever one you end up with, it's going to come with a whole host of like taboos and traditions that seem utterly like bizarre to people like us, right? But like,
yeah,
the benefits from like being able to smear the paint on your face that'll like keep the bullets away from you, and then like because of the craziness,
yes.
like it actually works. Like it only works if you believe it. You know what I mean? And like that,
absolutely,
that's a challenge, especially if you went to college, where we've been very, very much socialized against any sort of taboo, right? And like this is sort of a tentative still. Like you have not had a like conversion moment where you're like, no, dude, I'm here talking about Islam. You need to become an Islamist as well. You're setting out on a journey, right?
Well, that's the thing is that, yeah, no, I feel like from my position, I can't do that because like one thing I like I said is that my ability to prescribe for anybody action is totally limited because they're going to have to find what feels right in their lives. And I do think that will be spiritual, but the specific context of that spirituality cannot be prescribed, because if I say Catholicism or I say Islam, or if I pick one, then it is hitting the ears of everybody who has a incommensurate like symbolic association with that tradition as anathema, and then that will likely lead them to just eschewing everything I've been saying. But I know that it's annoying because you don't want to be a coexist bumper sticker person, but I think that if you take it as understood that you need a spiritual grounding in life, you need a spiritual community in life, and you take that as the guiding principle, then if your antenna is up, you can find it. But the specific contours are going to be determined by the community you find yourself in. And most importantly, what those symbols for the different various religious traditions mean to you, and how they can be fixed to emotions and given reality.
Yeah. Okay. So well, two follow-up on thoughts from that is, number one, you should just pick Catholicism and move to Pittsburgh because it's a good times. But number two would be like find common ground, and yeah, set people on their journeys, and I'll be the blind elephant, blind man with the elephant, and you got to find blah blah blah, right? Like all we have to label that as is the coexist bumper sticker, which everyone except like the lady who used to teach like dance classes at my middle school and had like the minivan with all the stickers on it thinks is fucking stupid. So
yeah,
is there a project for like a sort of populist, grounded, ready for the time politics that can also be ecumenical in a way that will still galvanize
there will
people?
be. I think it's inevitable, honestly. I honestly feel like all of that is inevitable. I feel like whether it's going to be enough, whether there's time enough, whether it will be effective enough at challenging capitalism is a question that's up in the air, one we can't know, and so we have to operate from the assumption that it could, just as we all must operate from the assumption that we have free will. And I think that it will be the practical context of struggle that will give the symbols meaning, not something that exists now. I don't think that necessarily means it's going to be like some syncretic thing from like Dune, like Zen Sunniism or something. But I do think that it will it will elide a lot of the sectarian problems that exist in trying to find a religious vocabulary for politics now. Because I think one of the things that does that in the current moment is that people hold their symbolic associations, their connections to these things as identity markers very closely, which is a luxury. It's a luxury of being in, like, even if we all feel that we're precarious and we feel like this is a downward mobility and that the future can't be better than the present, the future for the majority of politically active people is preferable to any imagined alternative. And that is the thing that I think freezes us. And that is the thing that gets us in our head and gets us to the point where we can imagine like solutions to our political crisis that don't require real sacrifice. But that luxury, I think, is going to go away. It's already going away. And the exigency of change is going to generate new forms of meaning and spiritual resonance that are going to synthesize politics and religion. And because the goal will be liberation, that those like specific ego-oriented connections to religious conceptions will be, if not totally obliterated, they will be tabled for the moment, if you know what I mean. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I just know that it's something that we all need to be aware of, but not thinking that we're going to find it by looking at the chicken entrails of online, but by feeling it out in the lives of the people around us.
And it's sort of funny because, like, talking about the coexist bumper sticker, like, I know we've talked a little bit about Marianne with her witch energy and all of this. And, like, I think of the sort of self-help movement such as it is, but and it really sort of feels like we're coming back to, as we look at the vista in front of us, it's sort of, all right, log off, make your bed, stand up straight, shoulders back, brush your teeth, meet your neighbors, bring over an apple pie, pray, meditate, and like you could expand the list, like start a garden, start a farm. We need to start, but like you have to do that without commoditizing it and being a self-help narcissist shithead. You have to do it without being too ironic and self-conscious, or you won't be able to get through it. You have to find God without becoming someone who would murder other people as part of that process, but you still have to do it earnestly, right, or you'll still be an alienated husk. And we've got to do it on a mass scale as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we're all going to die.
Yeah, pretty much.
Let's fucking go. Let's get it, baby.
That's yeah. Let's do it. Like, we have nothing to lose but your cringe. That's it. The only thing that's going to happen if you fuck up, if you is somebody is going to say that you were wrong, is that you were embarrassing. That cannot be a meaningful determiner of action anymore. No one, we just don't have the luxury for it. We're not hanging around Versailles, where a snicker behind the fan of like Madame de Pompadour is gonna like get you put behind the outhouse. We have to fucking it's join or die, as Ben Franklin said.
COVID, man, a fucking year from Jeffrey Epstein, quote unquote, killing himself in his cell, to coronavirus breaking out, right? And you've got like, I as I'm recording these episodes ahead of like our launch in like next week, like in March, right? Like I interviewed a virologist out of Harvard who's behind this RadVac program. And basically a year ago in March, these like rogue geniuses in Boston got together and say, hey, this thing's like, it could be the one, we don't know, but we know how vaccine development works and we know it's going to be years. Let's cook one up in our own, let's just like throw a lab together and cook one up. So they made an open source COVID-19 vaccine. And by the end of March, we're sniffing it up their own noses. And like 200 of them did it, and like only one dude got like a mild case of COVID. And he was like, and I just look back, like it took the Moderna people like 2 days to put together the recipe of their vaccine. And we're looking back at fucking 1 million people dead. And it really did take me that long, I think, to fully realize that, like, to, in your language, like you call customer service and no one's picking up. Like they're not coming. Like no one's coming.
Yeah, no one is coming. Everyone should know this by this point, that there is no investment at the top in anyone's well-being who is not a shareholder. They like to talk about stakeholders, but it really is just shareholder value, and you don't got to share.
So, get with the program.
Yeah.
Do you think, based on the response you've gotten on your stream, that there is because if I look at the right, like with the QAnon / Doomsday Prep crossover, they've got their own version of this. Do you think this has any purchase on the left?
I mean, the problem with the left is that it really isn't a thing. I mean, it is a subcultural affect. So I have no idea. I mean, I think that the process of disillusionment with the current parameters and our engagement with politics is happening across the spectrum, and that you see it manifesting in different ways depending on like cultural context. So that's why you have things like QAnon and stuff. But and so I think that there will be like among people who are motivated not by cultural grievance, but by a genuine desire to see the largest share of people given a chance at life, that the insufficiency of the current political order and also notions of left and right are going to deepen, and that something's going to emerge from it. I don't know. I mean, I see from what I have said that there is at least some audience for this, but the question of how that audience is going to translate these ideas into action is in my mind unknown. But I think that there is every reason to assume the best, assume the most positive possible outcome, because to do otherwise is to, at the end of the day, abnegate and your humanity, and to retreat into a solace of some sort of correctness that is detached from everyone else, from the basic moral requirement that being a human necessitates, and that it will not save you in any way, and it will not in very short order, it will not provide even a modicum of solace. So what do you have to lose? Literally nothing.